Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela Beyer, and today I am interviewing Vicky Hamilton. A lot of you know Vicky as one of the original managers of Guns N' Roses and Faster Pussycat and Motley Crue, but she's also an author, and she just released a book of poetry, Veiled Allusions, and we're going to talk about that and a little bit about the rest of her career. Thank you so much for coming on, Vicky.
Well, thanks for having me, Michaela. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And again, you have so many fans throughout across your bands and here in the LA community, and I know people are really, really excited to hear about your book.
Okay, I hope so. That would be great.
They are
Okay.
already. So. Alrighty, so do you remember the first time that you wrote a poem?
Well, I don't remember the exact first poem, but I had this teacher in junior high school named Larry Huff, and he really inspired me to write. And um, I was always very vigilant in his class, and I think I learned my first few things about writing from him, and it was around that time period that I first started writing. I put a
Nice.
few of those poems in the book just to show the growth. It's like you do get better as writers as time goes on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And now you mentioned that you were a wonderful student with that particular teacher. Were you a voracious reader as a young woman as well?
I did read a lot and I looked at a lot of magazines, like Star magazines. I was always interested in music and fashion and the arts, but I did take literature classes and read all the classics and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I'm an avid reader, even
Good.
now.
Yeah, good. And who are some poets that you admire?
Um, well, Edgar Allan Poe, I think, was maybe the first one, and I wrote down some because why not? Sylvia Plath, uh, um, what's her name? Ernest Nim, and I probably wasn't pronouncing that right, but she's a French poet and philosopher, and I don't know. Well, I also admire Iris Berry. I learned a lot from her, and that's where I you know, got probably the idea that I should put out a poetry book. I've been writing poetry for a long time, but you know, for me, poetry is mostly a way to work through my problems. So, I had stacks and stacks and stacks of poems. So I decided, okay, yeah, I'm gonna release it finally, some of them anyway. So
Nice.
yeah.
And along that line, you moved from your childhood home in Indiana to Hollywood, much like Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin, who you would later manage. Did you use writing poetry that way at that time as a way to cope with that adjustment?
Yeah, when I left Indiana, well, in Indiana, I was like a big fish in a small pond. And when I got to LA, I was a little fish in a big pond. So it was, quite an adjustment. And also, I find that people in Indiana, for the most part, are pretty honest. And in LA, that is not the case. So I got
Mhm.
taken advantage of a lot in my first couple of years here. But you know, I love LA, and in light of everything that's going on with the fires and everything else here right now, it's just I'm just heartbroken to see our city going up in flames and trying to figure out a way to help it get back to ground zero.
Yeah.
Oddly, I had this guy, I have a record company too called Dark Spark Music, and my next release on Friday is called California Calling, and I put it on the release schedule, back in December, but it's just oddly so fitting of what's going on. It's kind of a song about how people come to California to create their dreams and make them come true. But now the new dream is, getting California fixed and back to being what it was. So the artist Jim Camacho is gonna donate, the proceeds of that song to Music Cares because they're doing a thing where they're giving out $1,500 to musicians that well, there's a protocol that you have to be able to do it. I think you have to have your name on 5 records and whatever, but to try and help the musicians that have lost everything, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a sad state of affairs here.
It's a very sad state of affairs, and I think that it's wonderful seeing the community come together though like that, and that people do have resources. I mean, was that did you feel like you had support when you first came out here? I mean, I know you were just speaking about some of the challenges, but was there a community of people that you really trusted and felt like you could, lean on when things got tough?
Well, there were a few people. I mean, before I moved here, I met Tom Petty in Indiana and like interviewed him. And there was a guy that was a radio person that broke Tom's career called John Scott. And, he kind of like took me under his wing when I first came out here. And I remember I showed up at his office when I first moved here in like a 3-piece suit with a briefcase, and he kind of like laughed at me. You don't really need to do that, know. In California, like sort of everything goes. And there was a nurse that I stayed with that was from Fort Wayne, Indiana, where, you know, she was from originally, and I nearly got her fired because I like wanted to go out every night, and check things out and whatever, but she put me up in her place and sort of showed me the ropes and took me to the Sunset Strip for the first time. And then, eventually I started meeting people that became lifelong friends, so there were mentors there as well.
Mhm. Yep. So you feel like you eventually found a good community, even though there are, of course, going to be people that work against anyone in entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the sharks and snakes. I actually have
Hmm.
a poem in my book, called Sharks and Snakes and Other Animals because, there's greedy people in the music business and the entertainment business. And I actually wrote that poem while I was in, I think I was in Rome when I wrote that. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's funny when you like leave the country, you sort of get a perspective of what's happening in your own home, your own backyards.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. And do you think that your own creativity made you good at spotting talent in others?
Well, it certainly didn't hurt. It's I can say that, now that I've put out a memoir and a poetry book, and before that I was a painter. I went to art school, so
Hmm.
um, I've learned a lot of lessons since I've put out these books. I mean, the first one was, 10 years ago that I put it out, but as an A&R person at Geffen and Capital and stuff, I think I was a little harsher with artists that I probably should have been, because now that, I'm being judged on my own personal art, you know, I don't like it when people are super critical of me because, it's like people's art are people's art. And there's so many like keyboard pirates in the world, really, you know.
Hmm.
And when my first book came out, a lot of people told me, don't read your like reviews and whatever. But, I'm not like that. I want to hear everything. So so I
Yep.
read them, and I was like, okay, really? Did I come off like that? Oh, I don't know. It's like, but yeah, it's probably not good to read that stuff because there's a lot of people that are envious and jealous and just negative in general, and you can't take things personally. That's what I've come to know.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, in your writing, you were very honest about not only the good parts of working with these people, but also a lot of the negative parts. I mean, and as you pointed out, like there is such a larger opportunity for everyone to criticize now with social media and to be vocal and to get their words seen by a wider group of people. So it's actually quite brave to be putting out your writing.
Right. And if you're going to say something negative, say it to me, to my face, so I can like you know, at least say what I want to say back, in
Hmm.
response to that. I mean, I called the book Veiled Illusions for the innocent and the guilty. It's like I didn't use anyone's names, but if you know me, you can probably figure out who some of them are about anyway. But
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And with writing poetry, it also potentially gives you a bit more of a veil, there's the word again, to talk about these people. Whereas with your memoir, it had to be a little bit more direct and everything. I mean, do you feel like people were um are, are maybe a little bit more open to your writing when you're not directly addressing people, or when you're using a pseudonym, or not naming them?
Um, I don't know. The poetry is very raw and very poignant, I think. The memoir, I tried to tell the stories without judgment. And
Hmm.
like my main editor, this guy Peter Margolis, he like kind of like had opinions about some of the people I work with, and I would like take out what he said because I just really wanted to tell the stories and not have judgment. I
Yeah.
wanted to have the reader make their own judgment on what happened.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. And I've noticed that you write about relationships quite frequently in your poetry. Do you feel like your writing helps you learn about yourself and how you deal with relationships?
absolutely. During the last year, I fell in love with this guy and I like, really opened up my heart, body, and soul to him. And then he left me and ghosted me. There's like 5 poems about him in there. And, you know, and then I got into therapy. So, I'm still like working through that because, I don't know if it was because he was younger than me or what. It just was bizarre. I've never had anybody ghost me like that, not even in work environments. It's like I really want to talk things through. And it's like, when you're not given the opportunity for closure, it's like you're kind of left to your own devices to give yourself closure. So
Yeah.
it's been a rough ride in that way. But yeah, I definitely work through my relationships through poetry, and that's usually what inspires them, some kind of anger or sadness or whatever. I mean, I'm a pretty optimistic person in general, but it's like I don't usually sit down to write poems until it's like there's something that's bothering me, and then and then the first few lines come, and that's where it starts. So.
Hmm. Exactly. And maybe that's why it's so good to have an outlet. I mean, you do seem very positive in general, and like you've got a great outlook on life, but maybe your writing is a way to kind of fuel some of the anxieties that you have inside you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And also, I was going to ask if there were any women on the strip who were very supportive. Of course, you've already mentioned Iris Berry, and she's wonderful, and she's been such a champion of a lot of writing from the strip. So of course there's her, but anyone else?
I mean, Iris wasn't really on the strip. She was in Hollywood. It's like, I was very rock and roll and she's very punk rock. I've known her through that entire time, but we came from two different worlds. But,
Mhm.
when I started to write Appetite for Dysfunction, she was very helpful and helped me get that together. And, um, also with the poetry, because I think she's had 3 poetry books or something, and this was my first one, and she was very generous with her time and helping me put it together. Yeah, there were a few people that were on the Sunset Strip, like Janice Garza, who wrote the book about Lemmy. And she worked for Rip Magazine. We were kind of running buddies, and she, helped me also as a writer. And oh gosh, who else? Well, when I was working at Capitol Records, Kim Bowie was like a big champion for me. She was kind of my boss at Capitol. I mean, Gary Gersh was the president at that point, but she kind of like gave me the lay of the land. That was after Geffen, but you know, I wouldn't call that Sunset Strip necessarily. And oh yeah, another really big influence on me during that time period was Jennifer Perry, who I like lived with. And we both lived with Guns N' Roses and in my apartment. It was like at one point there was me, her, and everybody from the band except for Duff, who lived with his girlfriend. So that was a huge learning curve. And, a lot of poetry came out of that time period. And Jennifer, at that point in time, booked the Troubadour. I mean, she went on to Avalon Attractions, and then she worked for Sharon Osbourne and, helped create Ozfest and stuff. But we were kind of like rock and roll soulmates during that time period. And the upcoming TV series that I optioned, and they're like they've just hired a huge Hollywood writer to write, is about that time period. So
Cool.
me and Jennifer Perry. So it's kind of like me and Jennifer. It's kind of like the two broke girls of the Sunset Strip and all the bands that we worked with. We kind of ran the strip, and the Sunset Strip is like a big character in the series as well. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see that. I mean, for me, I love that there's this revitalized interest in the strip and in the music of the 1980s. And I was going to ask about the apartment you were talking about. Is this the apartment like right behind the whiskey where
Yeah. Isn't
yeah.
that where I met you? Was like right there. It was like I
Hmm.
did a call out with you for something. I can't remember what it was, but I remember meeting you there. Yeah,
Hmm.
it was Clark Street. Yeah,
Yep,
the first
exactly.
apartment building on Clark Street. I actually lived there, and then I lived, was it one, two, three, four buildings up in the building that Motley Crue lived in as well. Not while they lived there, but I lived in that building as well. But I did work with Motley Crue when they lived in that building. So when they moved
Oh.
out, there was a movie poster on the door, and it was kind of hanging on its hinges, and it said, um, "The Beast Within." You know, too bad we didn't have cell phones then. I would have like, snapped a picture of that because that was kind of priceless,
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Oh my gosh, the tales that must have happened there.
Yeah, that was a crazy building, and there was like a soda machine on the top that they like filled up with beer and stuff. So after the things closed down on the strip, you would see this line of people just like sort of making their way up to, this building on Clark to continue the party.
Hmm.
Yeah.
My gosh, those were the days. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And okay, so what were some challenging moments early in your career where poetry really helped you as an outlet?
Well, certainly moving to LA, I know I wrote a lot when I first got here in the 80s, and you know, during the time period of working at Geffen Records, I wrote a lot of poetry because it was my first sort of foray into the boys club and the learning curve of how the record industry worked. I really had no clue. There are so many departments in a record company. It's like, okay, there's the A&R department, the legal department, the PR department, the marketing, the radio, da 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 da. I mean, this is where I learned,
Hmm.
most of the skills that I have now was, working with um, David Geffen was the owner and president, and then, Gary Gersh and Tom Zutat and John Kolodner, were the like three geniuses of the company. And,
Hmm.
I reported to Tom Zutat, but then I later went with Gary Gersh to Capitol Records, but yeah, it was a big learning curve, and inspired a lot of poetry about surviving the record industry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
A
And
lot of the poems are about, my struggle as a female in the record industry, basically.
yeah. And do you feel like it's easier for you now, or do you feel like it's just as challenging being a woman in this situation?
I think it's gotten somewhat better, not a lot. I mean, I like to think that I've like helped kick down the glass ceiling of the record industry a little bit for other girls in my path. And not to say that it's easy for men in the business. I mean, the record industry is challenging for anyone, it's
Mhm.
as David Geffen used to say to me, it's like if it was easy, everyone would do it. And that's absolutely true because it's fun, and it's creative. But, another thing he used to say to me is there were people with long knives waiting for you on the way down. So you have to be really careful how you um, work within, how you treat your contacts. You
Mm.
Respect is definitely and integrity is definitely required, and not a
Mhm.
lot of people in the industry have those tools. So,
Yeah, exactly. And do you feel like you eventually built up respect though? I mean, you managed so many of these bands that made a lot of money for the industry. I mean, Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, Faster Pussycat,
poison too.
and Poison.
Yeah. Um, so your question is if if do you think I got respect for it? Is that what you're asking me, or what's
Yeah,
the
exactly. I mean, do you think that it increased the respect for you? And I mean, you've also been mentioned in a lot of these people's books, and people seem to credit you with a lot of with I mean, certainly with the early rise of Guns N' Roses, for instance.
right? Yeah, I definitely have my spot in history for, I mean, my big thing is I like to be first and I like to be right. So
Mhm.
I've done that a lot. Um, did I make a lot of money from any of those projects? Not really, but I do know how to break acts and I still do it. I mean, I own a record company. I manage a band called Mother Wind and, I do feel like Motherwind gives me more respect than, the bands I did in the 80s. I mean, I don't know what it is about being a woman in a man's world, but, they always think that men can do it better. And during that time period, ex- especially the Guns N' Roses period, it was like Kim Fowley went around town saying, "Oh, Vicky's too pretty to manage the band." I mean, what's that got to do with anything? It's like, could I get them gigs? Did I get record companies to come see them? I absolutely did, So,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
so I,
Kim,
I don't understand why, being a woman is, in fact, I find that women are better nurturers than men. So I think in many respects, women make better managers.
yeah, and certainly better than him. I mean, I could go on and on about Kim Fowley and the many ways in which he was horrible and destructive to people in the music industry, but I mean, I thankfully you didn't follow his path or his advice.
It's funny because um, there will be a Kim Fowley character in the TV series, and Rick Springfield kind of wants to play him because Kim Fowley did the same shit to him. It's like, it's unbelievable how many people I don't know, I don't know if fucked over is the right word, but took advantage of. He took publishing on the Runaways and even one of Motley Crue's songs and many others, but you know.
And he tried to do the same thing with Duff McKagan and Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses music
Yeah.
at one point,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I
thankfully
came
they
home and was sitting in my apartment one day, trying to talk them into that during the bidding war, and I absolutely said, no, this isn't going to happen. They're in a bidding war. And I went into my room and I started throwing laundry into the basket and took it down into the laundry room. And the lights were off down there, and all of a sudden the lights came on, and there was like big, tall, scary Kim Fowley, and his arms are going like this, and he's like screaming at me, and I was like scared that he was gonna like hurt me. But I went under his arm and went crawling back upstairs. It's like, yeah,
he's
he was a scary one,
yeah, and deeply mentally ill and apparently assaulted one of the members of the Runaways. So, I mean,
at
uh,
least one. I
it,
think maybe a couple.
oh, I mean, I mean, just I think he deserves to be swept under the rug of history. Just yeah. So,
Well, they made him famous in that Runaway movie, and, you know, I don't know. I mean, he was born into the right period of time, and I don't know, he and Rodney Bingenheimer kind of ran Hollywood at that point in time, and Rodney certainly helped David Bowie like rise, at least in Los Angeles. But, I don't know, from like the 70s into the 80s, it was very misogynistic, and um, it, that just seemed like to be the norm. It's like I tried to just act like one of the boys to like escape it. There were
Mhm.
like sort of a couple of casting couch sort of scenarios that I like managed to escape, but you know, it was, and especially for performers, it's like me as a business person, was one thing, but singers and, you know, I felt for those girls.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that you were put in that situation. I mean, I'm glad you were able to get out of it, but I mean, I mean, it only goes to show that no woman was immune from it, though. I mean, whether it was a performer or a manager, or I would imagine any woman who was part of that scene.
Yeah. I was a lot cuter then, so I got it a lot more. But now I pretty much, I do what I want. But there are still a few boys club players that are always just waiting to like take me down. And it's just like, why? That was like 30 plus years ago. It's like, get a life, get over it.
Exactly. And, it's thankfully you've risen above that beautifully. And I hope that when the series comes out, people will appreciate you even more. And it kind of leads me to another question. Like you talked before about the Runaways movie, and we've had a couple of other movies and TV series that have covered sort of the 80s music scene, like The Dirt and Pam and Tommy and stuff. Do you have like any rock movies that are an inspiration to you in making your own project? I mean, did you like any of those movies, or is it going to be completely uh,
Uh,
something?
well, first of all, I think my series, it has not been written yet, but the way that they're talking about it, I think it's going to be based on my book, but fictionalized to some degree.
Mhm.
Um, so, I think it would be more like, oh gosh, what was the one on Fleetwood Mac? Oh, Daisy Jones and the Six. Like,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, maybe something more on that line. Then, like if it was going to be my true life story, and maybe that will happen as well at some point. I think that's a movie, not a TV series.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it's a TV series, I think you have to like fictionalize it to some degree to make it so that you can have the high drama and you know. But it'll be fun. I mean, the 80s was the period of excess. So, it was like sex, drugs, rock and roll, and even pre-AIDS. So,
Yeah.
we got away with a lot more stuff than, I think bands and industry people do today. And it's a
Mhm.
completely different business today. It's based on, streaming. Like I like to say, we used to give away t-shirts to sell records. Now we give away records to sell t-shirts, or at least that's the way it sort of seems.
Yeah, exactly. It's which I mean, it's kind of it's unfortunate that it's turned out that way and that artists have been so robbed of revenue from their work, whether it's physical copies or I'm kind of thinking more of streaming. I think they're paid like 0.001 cent per song stream on Spotify now. I mean, how do you think it ended up that how did it get to this point, and was there a way to prevent that from happening?
Um, I think it started back with Napster and the file sharing more than anything else, and the streaming contracts, you know, was just the way of how the industry could gain control of um, artist again. But this has been going on since at least the 50s, and like jazz artists and things like that. Some of those contracts, and from what I understand, the managers and things of that period were very mafioso-y, and
Yeah.
I know of at least one movie that's going to be made about that era. And um, it's like the money people are always trying to figure out a way to control creatives, that's
Yeah.
probably never going to change,
Hmm.
you know.
Well, on a better note, did you feel like any of the artists that you worked with came to you for advice on how to have a good creative process?
Um, well, none of the big three.
Mhm.
But yes, Greg Darling, who I mean, I wrote a song with him last year called Triggered, which, I wrote the lyrics for. And I actually had a publishing deal with Virgin Music because I did 3 songs with Greg on his first record, Darling Cruel.
Mhm.
And one of them was the single, which is Everything's Over But the Shouting, and that's in the book, and as are, 3 of the other songs that I did with him. But so definitely Greg, and he's got a single coming out on the 24th. I gave him his own label called Two Lions, and he has a song coming out with Julian Lennon on the 24th that he co-wrote. Um,
Oh,
and Steve Badkey for My Napoleon, I wrote with a couple of times, and I'm still friends with him as well. Um, yeah, I wrote a song with Rusty Anderson once, who's Paul McCartney's guitar player. It's like
oh,
I try my hand at songwriting, and I was gonna write with oh God, what's Wes R. Keane, and we kept trying to like put together a writing session, and then he died, so it never came together. But there were several, rock stars that I, had writing sessions with, but, not a lot of them came out other than the Darling Cruel ones. So,
okay. Well, one that I'm curious about is your work with June Carter Cash. I mean,
oh,
you write about relationships quite a lot in your poetry, and she actually wrote one of the great love songs of our time. What
absolutely. She wrote Ring
Ring
of
of
Fire about falling in love with Johnny Cash. That's how she worked through that. And she told me that she was like scared to death of the feelings that she had for him. And, he was in another marriage and she was in a marriage. So it was like she kind of avoided him for a long time. And I don't know, if you had actually witnessed them together, you would just know that they were soulmates. Like, when I made Press On, they were married and together and they had this cross. It was like a big honking cross with like all these like stones on it and stuff. And whoever needed it more that day, they like passed it back and forth. It was like just really so sweet. And they kind of carried on like teenagers, and like their love affair. And it was really beautiful to watch. Um,
Mhm.
True soulmates, I would say.
My gosh. That sounds
Yeah.
so, don't you just love watching people like that who you know get each other so well and have such a wonderful relationship?
Well, not to say that their relationship wasn't hard, because I'm sure it was. And June had a career of her own, but she always put Johnny's needs and wants before her. She had like these 7 rules of, a happy life. And, she came to his aid always, and they also, harvested a lot of artists out of Nashville, the two of them. So I don't know. I miss them both a lot. They were really, sweet, wonderful people. And like Johnny Cash was like one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life. And, for me, it was like, most of the bands I worked, whether it was Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, whatever, it was like they were baby bands when I worked with them. When I made that record with June, she was already iconic. So it was like a whole different feel.
Mhm.
And the way that they took me under their arm and like just, you know, I don't know. Let's just say it was a mutual love society. It was like June never really Because, when I made that record, it was pre-Walk the Line, and a lot of people I don't even think knew who June Carter was at that point in time. But it was just like incredible. And the documentary June that came out last year, was that last year or this? Yeah, last year. I
Mhm.
forget that it's January now. It's up for a Grammy, and it was like there was like all this footage in the documentary that I never saw, and where, she was talking about me and stuff. Oh, it's just beautiful, and that little
Exactly.
cabin. I mean, after we made that record, then Johnny Cash like made the cabin into like a legitimate recording studio with, ISO booths and a control room and all that. But when we made that record with June, it was just like a little cabin, and they all sat in like a circle in the living room and, recorded these songs. And JJ Blair, who, was the engineer and slash producer with John Carter Cash, he like flew all his stuff out there from his studio here, and there would be fires in the fireplace because there was a big fireplace in there, like a hearth type thing. We'd have to
Uh-huh.
wait for the fire to like burn down so that they could like record, because it was crackling through the tracks.
Uh-huh.
So it was really like being on the porch with John and June. And, that's what Elvis Costello said to Rolling Stone too. It was like a big compliment about, how it was like just hanging out with them. And that's what we really wanted. And we were able to capture that. So it
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you were part of an album that won a Grammy. What was that like?
Fantastic. I mean, I never saw that coming. Or the documentary being up for a Grammy, is a big honor too, since, it was
Mhm.
mostly about the making of that. Well, not mostly, but a lot of it was about making that record. And they kind of made me the Rick Rubin of the story, which was like really sweet. I mean, I don't know that I had that kind of control over it, but, I just loved her. I really didn't know very much about country music when I decided to do it. And my niece, who lived in Nashville and worked with the Dixie Chicks and a lot of country bands, when I told her about it, Joanne, she's like, well, I'll have to get you an auto harp. So, to congratulate you on this. And I was like, what's an auto harp? Like, I didn't even know. So my niece Joanne Burnside sort of like gave me the 101 of country music, because like, violins, a fiddle, and, it's just like same interest instruments but different names. But
Yeah, but and I feel like June and the people who made that documentary gave you the credit because again, this was a female artist who saw your value and saw how much you helped her in this situation.
she actually said at one point, oh, Vicky made that record with Guns N' Roses and managed them, and she's like, I'll be no problem for her. And at one point, I wanted to make a record with Jerry Lee Lewis, and, I went to David Geffen about it, and he's like, "No way, that's gonna happen." But, I loved him too.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, he like I'll be honest with you, like I've heard I mean I admire him as an artist of course, but I don't like I've heard I think like a lot of people I've heard some kind of mixed things about his personal life. What was he like to be around?
oh, I didn't know him very well. I mean, one of my first jobs when I moved to town was I was a waitress at the Palomino. That was actually my very first job in LA, and I think I lasted like 2 weeks. But one of the shows I worked was Jerry Lee Lewis, and I met him at that show. And I found him very charming. It's like, I know he like married his cousin or something like that, and he had some pretty whacked out Christian beliefs, I think, but I didn't see any of that. All I knew was that he could like slam it on the piano more than anyone I'd ever seen in my life, and that's what I really appreciated about him. And I mean, come on, Great Balls of Fire. I mean, some of his songs were just, iconic.
Y- Yeah, I mean he was one of the fathers of rock and roll.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And he had that wild hair and stuff and played with his butt and
Yep.
I like a
One of
good
the
showman, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we all do. And I mean, I at the end of the day, I don't I don't know enough about him to judge him, so I just admire his work, you know?
Right. You know,
Alrighty.
John and June knew all those people. Like June was very close with Patsy Cline and people like that as well. It's like hearing those stories was incredible, you know.
Exactly. Yep. And I believe that wasn't J June actually the godmother of Hank Williams Jr. as well?
I believe that's true, yes.
Yeah, like she and her family and Johnny were kind of kind of the godparents of that entire scene
Yeah.
in Nashville.
I think what she told me was that his body was found in a car, like in Virginia, like where my family is from. Like, they were from like Oak Hill, West Virginia, and he was just found dead in a car, and West Virginia or something. That's kind of what I remember. That could be not true. I don't know, but that's what I remember her telling me.
Yeah. I mean, you know,
She
that's sad
loved
for him,
him.
but yeah, but I'm glad the same fate didn't befall Johnny, you know, and she
Oh,
was kind
yeah.
of instrumental in getting him help, making sure that didn't
Yeah.
happen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if she actually like scared him away with a shotgun, but I think she would have to protect her man.
Yep. Yep.
You know.
Yeah. Wonderful lady and a very inspiring love story.
It was like I I still am pretty close with the Cashes in Nashville. They have, the studio still in Hendersonville. And I took a friend of mine who works at the Orange Peel from Asheville and a band that I was working with at the time, Lovely World, to the place. And the guy from the Orange Peel, they're like showing him like all these old Johnny guitars. And he goes, and he's like sniffing it into like this acoustic guitar. I was like, be careful. You never know what's in there.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. You know, if you watch the new Dylan movie, there are actually some pretty cool
I
scenes
saw it.
between. Oh, you
I
saw it?
saw
What
it.
did you think?
Loved it. Did you love it?
I loved it. It was great.
Yeah.
Absolutely great. And again, they kind of let Dylan be Dylan. They didn't try to like make him into a hero for today. He just, to me, it was an honest look at at him as an artist and a human being.
Yeah. And it was beautifully shot and great casting. And like, I would love Elle Fanning to play me in the series. I mean, she's probably too popular now, but she would be my first choice. I love her. And
Yeah,
yeah,
she's
I
brilliant.
thought it was really well done, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people talk about Dylan being an asshole, but he knew what he wanted, and I think
Mhm.
you have to let artists go through their phases of creativity, and
Yep. And
I can understand why he didn't want to be a folk artist anymore, you know.
yeah, and we've kind of got to let them be people. I mean, he's a wonderful artist, but at the end of the day, he's a human being who had flaws of his own, and I like the fact that the movie let us see that side of him. So,
Yeah, I want to see it again, actually, I loved it.
yeah, I loved it too. It's great. Alrighty. And okay, so one thing that I wanted to ask about is having your own record label. Of course, you were head of a record label when you made the album with June. Was it great being your own boss after having worked in the industry so many years?
Yeah, it was fantastic. She would like write me these letters and her and John Carter would make these tapes and send me these songs, and it was like I got to go through and help her pick, the 12 songs that she did. And oh gosh, it was just like really fun to redo, Ring of Fire the way she originally wrote it. And you know, like I used to be somebody, which she wrote about, going back and forth between Nashville and New York City when she was like being an actress. And
Yeah.
I mean, she had such an amazing life, and she never met a stranger. Her daughter Rosie told me this story about how this wrong number had called her and she like talked to them for an hour, you know. It's like she would chat anyone up, you know, and they were just uh, you know, there's so much to be said about them and their life, you know.
Hmm. Exactly. And one thing I wanted to mention about what it was like for you at that time, it seems like when the Sunset Strip was on its decline, you actually were on an uptick. I mean, working with June. Did you have confidence in yourself, and your ability to survive in your career, even as kind of grunge was overtaking the Sunset Strip in Hollywood scene?
Um, it was kind of a weird period for me because I was still working at Geffen, but then, you know, they didn't pick up my contract. I think that was like in 91. So
Hmm.
I lost my job around then. But, you know, hanging out at the Rainbow like we all did then, it was like bizarre because all of you know, glam metal bands were still doing what they do. And, you know, across the street, I was watching Nirvana like explode, and the marketing people at Geffen were like, don't do anything, it's working. You know, it's like if they tried to promote it the wrong way, maybe it would fail or something. I mean, I think it would have succeeded no matter what. But so it wasn't long after that that, you know, all the labels started dropping the metal glam bands that they had because they had gotten as glam and metal as they could get, and every label had five or six of them. So it was like, I think it was shocking to those bands, but then shortly thereafter, those bands started wearing the plaid shirts and all that stuff and trying to be, you know, grunge. And I went up to Seattle a lot and like checked bands out. But then I ended up going to work at Lookout Management, which was Neil Young's management company with Elliot Roberts. And Elliot had been partners with David Geffen in the early days. And, you know, Elliot said to me, well, why do you want to work with me? You already worked with the genius, meaning David Geffen, you know. And I go, well, you're a genius too, just in a different way, you know. So I got to see both sides of the street there.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was all good, different, but good, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I was grateful to like have the job, and I kind of helped them start Vapor Records. And then I went to Capitol with Gary Gersh. But yeah, I don't know. What was the original question? I don't think I hit on the actual thing.
Oh, actually, just yeah, I wanted to, and that was a good answer. Like, I just wanted to know what it was like for your career to be on a rise when the Sunset Strip was kind of on a decline at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So that was good, and that all happened. But then, you know, when Capital didn't pick up my option, I hit my lowest bottom. So that was, you know, a few years after that, I think maybe 2001 or 2. And horrible, you know, and that's when I decided to like get sober. I've been sober now 24 years, and
Congratulations.
I had to really look at everything. And, you know, I became a dog walker, and, you know, oh God, it was just hideous experience all the way around. But, you know, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and it kind of like um prepares you for, you know, what's that saying? You know more about what will work by what didn't work, you
Mhm.
know? So,
Yeah.
you know, the record industry, and that was like the time period of Napster, and everybody sort of lost their jobs during that time period. But, you know,
Mhm.
and then they remade the record industry into this, you know, file sharing and then later streaming sort of technology. And you know, I stayed with it, but I went back to school. I went to UCLA and took writing classes, and that's when I started writing my memoir. And that took 7 years and then 3 more years to like edit and put together. And, you know, you go into these things thinking, okay, I'll have a book within a year. It's like, yeah, right. Good luck with that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've learned a lot, and now with the TV series, I'm starting to learn a lot about filmmaking and TV making. And, I shot like 100 hours of video footage that hopefully one day will be a documentary. And a lot of the people I interviewed are dead now, so it becomes, um, as Marianne Williamson said to me, archival. you know, because
Yeah,
like I had Jerry Heller and Kim Fowley and, now Barry Squire is dead. I interviewed him and, a lot of the people I interviewed, like Dick Dale, I interviewed. He was incredible. So many good interviews.
yeah.
I just don't know how to string it together. You tell the story of the music industry, or what do you tell with it? It's like I need somebody that's like a great editor to come and like string it out with me so I know what to do. But
Yeah, it's complicated, but there's probably a wonderful way to put it together. I
yeah,
would
I'm
keep
sure
at it.
there is. I haven't figured out the total angle on it. I mean, I think I'm gonna have to tell a story because I'm the only constant through the recording, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Now, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is, did you feel like any of the any like the women of the Sunset Strip in Hollywood scene weren't given the chance to succeed commercially the way that bands like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue were?
You're talking about artists or
Hmm.
oh. I brought a band called Halfway Home to Geffen, which had a great girl singer named Jenny Berry. And, I don't feel like she got her props, kind of got buried under the rug. And then, of course, Inger Laurie, like with the Nymphs, it's like you know, they made that record, but, I don't think they put as much into it as they probably should have. I also tried to sign Janet Napolitano. She had already put out one record with Concrete Blonde, but I did demos with her, and David Geffen said, "Oh, good demos," and then she went running back to Miles Copeland. But and I still love her music and listen to it all the time. I mean, it was more of a male-dominated music scene, but there certainly were a lot of women that deserved to have their shot in that, but it seemed like they only promoted pop oriented girls um like the girl in the Divinals. That record did pretty well, but she was from Australia, and it was sort of pop dance oriented, even though it was a rock record. Like I still love that record and I still listen to it too, but yeah, the girls kind of got left out, other than like the Runaways and a few others. But yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry that the Ringling Sisters didn't make it big.
Yeah. Yeah. I only saw one of their shows, so they were entertaining, for
Okay.
sure. But
Yeah.
they were more punk rock than rock.
Yes.
They
Yeah. I mean,
they
sorry, go
came
ahead.
out of that whole Disgraceland sort of vibe, which I love. But that's not competing with Motley Crue. That's competing with the Sex Pistols.
Yep. Yeah, I mean another band, and they wound up signing with MCA, and I love them, and I think they should have been as big as Guns N' Roses. Did you like the Broken Homes?
I did like the Broken Homes. Um, I saw them a few times. You know, I never bid on them though or anything like that. It wasn't quite there. And I know that you're like a huge fan of Hanoi Rocks, which I was a huge fan of Hanoi Rocks, and I actually got Poison on as the opener for that Palace show that they were gonna do, and then that was when that accident happened with Vince Neil and Razzle, and I had interviewed Mike Monroe several years later. It was when he did one of his solo shows at the Viper Room, and he said that it was very hard for him to come back to Los Angeles after that happened. It was like that hit him really hard, I'm sure. I mean, they were brothers in a band together,
Yeah.
but they were fantastic. And at one point, I shared an office with Richard Bishop, who managed Hanoi Rocks. So, that I had gotten to know Mike Monroe and also Vince Ely, who was in the Psychedelic Furs and the Cure. I got to know a lot of the bands from Europe because, I shared that office with Richard. I was like an outpatient of Geffen. So we had like this great little office on Sycamore in Hollywood. In many ways, that was like my favorite time period of working at Geffen. Once I moved into the main office on Sunset, it wasn't as free, it became
Hmm.
more corporate in structure. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anyone with whom you were comfortable showing your writing as a young woman?
well, there was definitely Larry Huff, that teacher at the junior high school. And I had a couple of friends that were writers during that time period too. Sherry Maroney, who I went to school with, and others. Um, Not really my family, they were not very art oriented, so I didn't, it was more about the crowd I ran with.
Hmm. Yep. And when did you decide that you were going to publish your memoirs and poetry?
Well, the memoir I always wanted to do, and when I had done my contract with Geffen Records, they wanted to like have control of anything that I wrote like that. And I was like, no, that isn't happening. So I knew very early on that I wanted to write a book. And one of the smartest things I did when I wrote the book was, you know, when I decided I was going to write it, I went and I made tapes on each of the bands and told stories about what they did, like that Poison story where Bobby Dahl like took a shit in the Cheerio box when the LA Weekly writer, said that he didn't think they'd been eating their Cheerios. It's like I had completely forgotten that. So
Hmm.
thankfully I made that tape and, because that's really funny. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And
So,
um, and I was going to ask about when that book was released. I mean, did it generally get a good reception from the people who that you had written about?
um, I would say the music fans really loved it. The bands, not so much, because they never want to like acknowledge that they had humble beginnings.
Hmm.
It's like they want people to believe that they popped out of the womb like, rock stars, so they don't want to read that stuff. So
Hmm.
whatever, but it's my story too, so I can tell that story.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And have you felt like you kind of had to defend yourself a little bit because of that? Like, was there anyone who actually said something that you felt compelled to respond to defend what you had said in that book?
Not really. It was like I went to major publishers when I like first finished it, and I had one major publishers, offer me 3 grand, and I was like, let me get this straight. I spent 7 years writing this book. You want to give me 3 grand? No. And one of the biggest learning things I've learned from that experience was because I did all my own fulfillment and everything. I self-published and I mailed out every single book. And, in the end, now that I'm making a TV series, I own 100% of the book. So it was the right thing to do because had I done a major publishing deal, they would have tried to grab 50% of it. And. Yeah, I'm glad I did it the way I did it. And I'm doing that also with the poetry book. It's just like I'm controlling what happens with it. And I've had a TV person say, "Well, they would make great these poems would make great episodes for, each one or whatever. And then I had a Grammy winning producer say, well, maybe I will take one of these poems and make it a song. I was like, yeah, by all means, try it.
Yep.
So, you know, I don't know, creativity kind of has a life of its own and you kind of just got to let it go. I don't like being put in a box. You probably figured that out from this interview. It's like
Yep.
I want to be able to do whatever I want to do.
Hmm. Yep. And that was a smart business move as well. And I think that with the television series, just your role in the music industry is going to be even more appreciated. So I'm glad that you kept the rights to that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We're not there. We're not to the finish line yet, but it feels like it's gonna go. I laugh. I tell people all the time, I think the reason why people cry when they go to pick up their Oscar or their Grammy is because it takes so long that they actually think it will never happen. That's what makes them cry.
Yep. Yep. Nothing is really an overnight success. It takes so much work to
Never.
that
And
point.
when they say the overnight success, it's usually at least 10 years, so.
Exactly. Yep.
And
It's
it's like how many of those do you get in a lifetime? It's like I'm writing a new book now. It's like I don't know how many more books I've got in me. And at some point I want to start painting again too. And it's very odd for me that I just don't seem to be able to write and paint at the same time. It's one or the other, but right now it's writing, so
yeah.
so
Yep. Just you find your own way to thrive.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about, how did you select which poems were going to appear in your book?
I don't know. I just tried to pick the ones that I thought were the best, and Peter Margolis, who edited my memoir, also edited my poetry book, and he had some input. And then Kaylee Credit, who does marketing for me on my record company, did all those beautiful little drawings on the inside. Not the cover. The cover was Lori Lipton, who is fucking phenomenal.
Hmm.
Her artwork is crazy good. You know, I just picked the ones that I thought were good. And Peter tried to talk me out of like running those, like, I think it was like four or five, like from the 70s when I first started writing. But I thought it was important to run those, not because they were good, because they're certainly not that good. But it to me is about the journey of being a writer. And you know, back then I thought those were fantastic. And I mean, now I think the ones I wrote last year are the best. And I think it's that way for anyone that's a writer. They always think whatever their newest stuff is the best, but not necessarily true.
And it's nice seeing your evolution.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, I know that I have like healed my soul in a lot of ways over the years. I mean, drugs and alcohol, certainly 24 years. And now, it's like my therapist is like an inner child, like specialist. And it's like, I really feel like I'm emotionally sort of healed from those experiences more than ever now. It's like when I first started managing bands, I wanted to do it because I wanted them to be my like family and friends. And now I really get that it's a business and they're not my friends and they're not my family. I mean, I can be
Mhm.
there for them in that way. And, if they ask me my opinion on personal stuff, I will tell them, but not before because I don't want to get in the middle of them and their girlfriends and their friends and whatever. That's their life, not mine.
Exactly. Yep. And that's a good boundary to have.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
And how do you feel that like you've changed what is the way in which you've changed the most as a writer, like from when you were writing as a child till now?
well, as a poetry writer, is that what you're asking me?
Exactly.
So, as a poetry writer in the beginning, I thought everything had to rhyme, and it doesn't. I think what is sort of magical about my book is that they're all like short stories, and um I'm able to tell the stories, but I think anybody can read any one of those poems and write their own story with that poem, and I'm okay with that. It's like, um, that's how art should be. Everyone should be able to take away something for themselves, you know.
Yeah. What new things did you discover about yourself as you were putting the book together?
Oh boy. Well, the early poems, I was like kind of boy crazy. And then through the 80s, I was like a workaholic and a drug addict. And the newer poems, I'm kind of cynical and I don't want to be that, I have to like always go into my brain and say, okay, be open-minded. You don't really know the whole story here. So, be open to new experiences and, outcomes and things like that. Like I cannot figure out why we're having these fires except for, you know, political BS and things like that. But I'm hoping that Los Angeles will grow better and stronger out of this and that there will be more of a camaraderie with artists, and
Mhm.
you know, um there's a lot more people than there are politicians. So if our voice is loud enough, we can change the world. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think that California would be a wonderful place to actually lead the rest of the country on these issues, like fighting climate change, like having a universal healthcare system so that artists have more of an opportunity to thrive without having to spend all this money on health insurance, and also figuring out the cost of living in California to the point where people can actually afford to have good homes here.
Yeah, they're like
Um,
price. So many people are out of houses. They're price gouging the rentals. Like some, I saw a realtor on some um, Instagram thing saying that she went to look at a couple places for her client and they had raised it $5,000. You know, it's
yeah,
like, come on, have a little heart here.
yeah,
But the other thing is that Los Angeles and California in general, you know, I read somewhere that it's 70% of the US economy. So we really kind of control the world of the United States anyway, of the money that happens here. So, us as creatives have to like really step up and have a voice. I mean, like a Bob Dylan, you know what I mean? It's like that didn't work out so well for him, but at least he said, what he wanted to say. I want to see the new Rage Against the Machine or, whoever, it's like wake up people, especially with climate change. It's like this is a big issue for us.
yeah, exactly.
And also, clearing up the brush and the dry stuff because we don't have rain. It's like there's got to be a better way to do that. I'm
Hmm.
part Native American, and I was talking to another friend of mine, Cannon, who is also Native American, and he's like, they need to go back and like do these burnings where they burn up this brush so that when the fires do come through, that it doesn't take everything down with it.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
There were several things that could have been done to at least minimize the damage in this way, and unfortunately they weren't accomplished. And I mean, I hope that this is an opportunity for California to learn and also to encourage the rest of the country to make meaningful changes in our approach to climate change before similar things start happening to them.
And why was the reservoir above Palisades empty? This makes no sense to me. It's like
Yeah, there
knowing
was
how dry it is right now. I mean, they said they were making repairs to it or whatever, but there was no, repair stuff around it, apparently, or at least that's what I heard on Instagram. I mean, you never know what's real and what isn't these days, but I don't understand why there was no water, you know.
I know. It's definitely something that's going to be investigated in the coming months, and I mean, again, we need to see this as an opportunity to make changes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Alrighty. And what's next for you professionally and personally? You've mentioned the show is happening. What else is going on?
Well, that is like my biggest priority at this moment in time. And then also the record company. And I absolutely love Motherwind and I'm hell bent on making them super successful. I'm working with a lot of really great artists now, like Jim Camacho, this California Calling song I'm really excited about. And it sounds like Tom Petty and it's all, it's about California. It's like, you know, the timing on this is not escaping me. It's like what God said, let's roll this. Out there.
Hmm.
I'm writing a new book. I don't know. I guess those are the things, it's like my my lawyer, Holly Browdy, and the head of my record label, Dark Spark Music, Eric Smith, were like putting together Vicky Hamilton Enterprises and selling shares right now. And I mean, it's just a whole different day in my world. You know, I don't know. I've never felt like a corporate person, but I'm kind of a corporate person now, and I hope that I'll be able to help a lot of young entrepreneurs and women get to the next level.
That's
That's
fantastic. I love the sound of that. And how do you want to be remembered?
um I guess I want to be remembered as a manager and an A&R person who really loved music and believed in music and art and making the world a better place. Hopefully that
Yeah,
I've kicked down the glass ceiling a little bit too. I've tried.
yeah. I think you've succeeded
Ah,
beautifully.
thanks.
Alrighty, Vicky. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And everybody go out and buy Vicky's book, Veiled Illusions. You can find it on her website and also in, I believe, some local stores here in LA.
Well, if they ordered it, yeah. But I have it on my website at vickyhamilton.com and it's available on Amazon. But cut out the middle person, buy it from me, and I'll sign it for you. So,
Excellent.
yeah, and you can buy also Appetite for Dysfunction on my website as well, too. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vicky.
Thanks, Micaiah.